Hi, this is Misha, and in this one we're going to look at the Constitution class, specifically kind of its evolution on screen and a little bit off screen. Obviously this is the original Enterprise from the original series, and I have 5 examples up here. I've got the original version from the cage, at least a good stand-in for it, I'll talk about. Then I have the shooting model for the original series. Then I have the Phase 2, which actually never went in except in some diagrams, but it had a great influence on what came next. I've got the Refit Enterprise. And then I've got the Enterprise A, which you'll notice looks very, 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 very similar, because they use the same model, but that happens. So let's kind of start at the beginning. It's often said that there were only 12 Constitution classes. This isn't true. It can't be. We know more than that many with the, designation and name. But it's possible that 12 were initially sent out. The Enterprise itself dated back to 2245. I don't care what any JJ verse stuff says. The first launch was in 2245. Under Captain April, and then we had Captain Pike, and then finally everyone's favorite Captain Kirk. And actually after Kirk, in between Star Trek the Motion Picture and Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Spock had been the captain for some time. And then Kirk blew it up. So, the original model that was used in the cage, and to some extent in a modified form in the second pilot, where no man has gone before, was this here. Well, sort of. This is the Mirror Universe one, which they used in the re-edited, the enhanced version for the Blu-ray. The major differences are with the nacelles. Probably, I don't know if I'll be able to get these on camera for you folks. I'll do my best. They have little spikes on the Brassard collectors, the red bits. And then on the back, the ends of the nacelles are a little different. They don't have little balls or grills. Now, originally, this version from the cage had a larger bridge module, which this model does not have. That was because the scale for the ship originally was smaller. It was only going to have a crew of about 200. That was for the first pilot. Between that and the main series, they decided to scale the crew up to about 400 to 430. Sometimes 450. And that's where we have the main shooting model here. Have the simple balls we're used to. The bridge was made smaller to help with the scaling of the ship. 21 decks, about 289 meters. Max warp of about 8 on the old scale, the one that will still be used in the Enterprise series. With a cruise of about 6.5. We saw this version at least by 2265. And 12 of these were sent out as kind of deep space exploration, defense, diplomatic craft, and of those, only the Enterprise made it wholly and completely back under its own locomotion. All the other ships were destroyed, lost, or severely crippled. This was really the only Federation model seen in the original series, at least as it aired in the 60s and 70s when it re-aired, reruns. Now in the new version, the one they updated with improved graphics, they did add some CGI models, and we'll look at some of those in a later video. But originally this was the Federation ship that was actually on screen and canon. Next up, and the reason I mostly brought this one out is because of how much it influenced later designs. This was the Phase 2 ship. This was going to be a new series set to release in the mid to late 70s, a new 5-year mission. It would have most of the original crew returning except for Nimoy. They had a all-Vulcan science officer to replace him. Essentially updated 70s graphics. I don't know, think like Buck Rogers or Battlestar Galactica meets Star Trek. We have a lot of the similar look to the Enterprise from the original. Same basic deflector, just a little different. The saucer has a little more detailing, the model itself. But where we really enhance things and where we will really carry forward are with the new nacelles. Yeah, this thing does not sit on its stand very tightly. They were definitely reminiscent of the later movie. The more boxy styling and the swept back pylons. Again, this was only a prototype. It was never actually seen on screen as a fully fledged ship. However, there are some diagrams that appear kind of it in the movies. I think 2 and 3, possibly 1. So that tells us maybe one time in between the series and the movie or somewhere in there could have been ships like this, or maybe even the Enterprise went through a phase like this. After all, we don't know all of its history. Up to this point, we know they would have just had all photon torpedoes and phasers, although to be fair, in the cage they had lasers, not phasers, but the canonicity is kind of debatable with some of that, obviously. And then we get into the movie Refit here. Probably the most popular Enterprise, or definitely in the top ones. People really like this, myself included. This was kind of the new hot ship when I was a kid. You see a lot of the Phase 2 carried over in the engines. Also the more detail in the saucer paneling. And of course it has this very unique deflector that is, how close do I have you? I don't know. Blue, although in some scenes it looks more of a yellow or gold. Supposedly when it's being powered up. We seem to have additional or enhanced photon torpedoes. We have a different pattern of phaser, different style of energizing the phaser, as Decker states in the movie. So we can assume upgraded, more powerful phasers. We can also assume a little better engines. I mean, we went to a new type of warp core. So seems to have a cruise of about 7 to 7.5, and then a max warp of about 9. We saw this in 3 movies. Obviously the motion picture, Wrath of Khan, where it got wailed on. And then in The Search for Spock, Star Trek 3, where it was exploded. A lot of people comment, rightfully so, that this would have been a refit, but what remains of the original ship, because it's so different. I would agree, but I'd also agree there's a certain suspension of disbelief. I know that the saucer and that the engineering hull are technically a different shape from the original, but I think we can also just say that it's just what happens when you blow things up from the small screen to the big screen. We saw this with Next Generation. The bridge changed a bit when we went to the Generations movie versus the TV show. So we can honestly assume some of the shapes were already there and just basically say they replaced the deflector, the phasers, the engines, and of course they retooled the interior, but they've made it very clear that Star Trek bridges and presumably other ships are kind of modular. Anyway, guys, would you really want the look of the TOS sets on the big screen in the late 70s, 1979? It would have been eh. And of course they further updated some of the sets for the Wrath of Khan. And then finally, the Enterprise A. It was basically the exact same model as the refurbished Refit Enterprise. Although over time, the color and paint would change. Originally, in the motion picture, it would have a very white paint, and then they would kind of tone it down for the Wrath of Khan to more of a gray, but then they would repaint it again after Star Trek 4, so it kind of got a little whiter again for 5, and of course different colors, different shots. So you will see this ship both in more of the white and the gray, just depending. At least that's my understanding from a blind guy who is pretty much doing this all by kind of rote memorization and theoretical of color. So yes, I could be completely talking out of my ass. If so, apologies. So we saw this at the end of Star Trek 4, good. We saw it in Star Trek 5, not good. And we saw it in Star Trek 6, good. And then it was, for some reason, decommissioned. I could understand maybe taking it out of the front lines, but why decommission it? Because it seems like it only was commissioned in 2286, maybe 2287 at the latest. So why they'd want to decommission it by 2293 seems a little silly. Now I know they say maybe it was originally the Yorktown, and so it was renamed in honor of the Enterprise. But who knows? Now to be fair, Yorktown was one of the early names that Roddenberry kind of considered and pushed for before kind of settling on the Enterprise. So there is that. Kind of neat. So yeah, the evolution of the Constitution class. This was the heavy cruiser, the pride of the fleet, the starship in the 23rd century, but it seems like they were out of production by the early 24th century, being replaced by the Excelsior, the Miranda, even the Oberth in some instances, and then later classes like the Constellation, and eventually Ambassador. So I hope you found this kind of interesting in a nerdy way. Again, I'll get to more specific reviews later on, but just thought I'd kind of lay out all the Enterprises here for you to look at. If you liked the video, please click like. Also check out the playlist for others similar. Any questions, comments, throw them below and I'll do my best to answer them. Appreciate you tuning in. This is Misha, and we will catch you next time.